You're listening to Object of Sound from Sonos, the show where we bring you in tune with the music that shapes our culture. When music lives in the air, it's one thing, but when you know the undercurrents and the ideas that went into a song, when you can feel its weight, it becomes more meaningful. I'm Hanif Abdurraqib, a poet and culture critic, and I'll be your guide as we seek a deeper way of listening. It's 1969, and hundreds of thousands of Black folks are streaming into Harlem for a series of concerts collectively called the Harlem Cultural Festival.
I'd like to go back to the olden days. Take a thing out for you. Something goes like this. I've got sunshine on a cloudy day.
There are those who refer to it as Black Woodstock, though when the Harlem Cultural Festival began, Woodstock hadn't happened yet. They happened in the same summer, but the Harlem Cultural Festival actually began a couple months earlier. And for a long time, the story of the festival went largely untold, though clips would sometimes surface on YouTube and then kind of vanish here and there.
I guess you would say, what pretty little girl can make a man like me feel this way? It's my girl.
It was a soul music festival primarily, and over 300,000 people were in attendance for the length of it, which ran from June to August. The festival was filmed at the time by a movie crew led by Hal Tolchin, and when you watch it, people are kind of in their Sunday best. There's Black folks dressed in immaculate suits, perfect hair. No matter the fact that it looked like it was very hot outside, layers and layers of colors, as we do sometimes, flared pants and head wraps. And outside of that, the lineup was singular. We have folks like Nina Simone, B.B. King, Sly and the Family Stone, Stevie Wonder, Gladys Knight and the Pips.
I bet you wonder how I do. Baby, that's playing to make me blue. With some other girl, you knew before.
Many people think about 1968 as a landmark year in terms of American activism, but 1969 was a year that was also pretty unrelenting in a way. Just in the summer of 1969, while the Harlem Cultural Festival was happening, there were the Stonewall riots, which actually happened the night before the first festival night. And then, about a month later, while the festival was still going on, there was the moon landing. And so this festival that centered on soul music was a point of propulsion for the political ecosystem that was happening at the time. But footage of the event was buried for over 50 years. It's just now coming to light in all of its fullness in a new documentary called Summer of Soul, or When the Revolution Could Not Be Televised, which is out right now, directed by our guest on the show today, the musician and scholar Questlove. You probably know Questlove best as a drummer for the Grammy Award-winning hip-hop group, the legendary Roots Crew, but he's also a DJ and also a music writer and also a thinker, storyteller, author of some wonderful books, including Mo Better Blues, The World According to Questlove, Soul Train, The Music, Dance, and Style of a Generation, and Something to Food About, Exploring Creativity with Innovative Chefs. He also drums for The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, of course, and with Summer of Soul, he's making his debut as a film director. And I really wanted to talk to him about the urgency and timelessness of this footage, about what it was like to work with archival footage, and what it is to bring to light footage that is begging to be seen. And then at the end of the show, I'll walk you through a playlist of songs from artists who performed at the Harlem Cultural Festival, and you'll hear from musicians like Sly and the Family Stone and the aforementioned Gladys Knight and the Pips. You can hear that playlist on mixcloud.com/Sonos, and we'll leave a link to it in the show notes. Then, with my final thought, I'll wrap the show talking a bit about the legacy of the Harlem Cultural Festival and the way that it echoes in Black art and Black art festivals and in Black gatherings today. Yo, Questlove, how you doing, fam?
What's up, brother? How you doing?
Good. Good to finally chop it up with you. I feel like we are in similar orbits, but have never had a good moment to chat.
A conversation, yeah.
I love the film. I got to see it in theaters this past weekend, which was really enjoyable. I think there's something about seeing a music doc in theaters that really captivates me in a way. And I got to thinking about archival, and who has the rights to archival and how the film was sort of a correction of the record, right? I was also thinking a lot about how hard it is to archive Black cultural production in a way. Because the footage, as you know, the footage was buried for this for years. The way I found out about the Harlem Cultural Festival is because there would be clips of it that would occasionally pop up on YouTube every now and then. Sly and Nina, and then sometimes they'd be taken down. They'd be up for a little bit and then be gone. And that created kind of a hunger in me to figure out why the path to get to this footage was so circuitous, and found out it'd been, pretty much buried for a while.
You want to know something funny? Like in the last 5 weeks alone, I've received some really crazy DMs of people telling me like, hey, I used to work on the da-da-da at University of Georgia, or I don't know, archive out in UCLA, and there's 30 hours of blah, 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 blah. So this isn't the only experience. I was kind of wondering, like, okay, now that I'm putting history in its proper place, are there any other festivals or anything of this caliber that was documented that's also just sitting there collecting dust that could change our lives? Dog, I'm afraid Annie laid it to tell you that answer is yes. I've heard at least from 6 of them in the past 5 weeks, and I know there's more than that.
I'll say this. When working on my last book, I was digging in archives of footage. One thing I know we have in common is that we've spent a lot of time in the archives of Soul Train footage. But in that research, you talk to people and you hear these kind of whispers of footage that has been buried, or stories of particularly Black music history that has been almost wiped away. And it's tough. Yeah, these things happen.
Black erasure is real. That's always been a constant. And, what I'm trying to explain to people is that this isn't the narrative of like some sort of underground conspiracy Illuminati meeting where it's like, we must stop this film at all costs. It's not that. To me, what's more dangerous than that is the benign version of racism where, it's just like casual, passive aggressive, like, it's not that big of a deal. And then you just go on about your day, like, to be dismissive. And that's sort of a dangerous practice that kind of happens to us all the time, where it's like, it's no big deal. Like, I passed on it, but I'm sure someone else will do it. Like, no one feels a sense of responsibility. So for me, when I was handed this film, I still don't see this as my directorial debut more than I see this as my moral responsibility to put history in the right context. There's a moment where in the middle of editing, I finally made myself read Prince's autobiography. And he speaks of like how Woodstock changed his life. Like that was his come to Jesus moment. As an 11-year-old, his dad taking him to see Woodstock. And all I kept thinking about was like, yo, man, like that could have changed my life. Now, the thing is, I wound up in the destination still without this movie because I was fortunate enough to somehow have chosen the right 2 people to come on earth to who were musicians and brought me into this path. But, what about the billions of other people that this could have changed? Like the way that Woodstock the movie and the legend of Woodstock the movie defined a generation and inspired a generation. Like definitely the movie is what people are glorifying, because at the time of the actual festival of Woodstock, like those acts were not household names.
Right.
It was the movies that made them legendary. And had that happened to this film as well, it would have been a whole new ball game. And actually what I say is, if any of the things that actually occurred at actual Woodstock happened at the Harlem Cultural Festival, then you would have heard about the Harlem Cultural.
Would have heard all about it.
Because the way that sort of Altamont is
Mhm.
is looked at now, that would have been the Harlem Cultural Festival.
Is there any benefit, though, to this film being present in our current moment where a lot of these acts have been lionized or more appreciated than they might have been had this film come out maybe 5 years after the festival was done?
You know, I still maintain that this film's going to serve its purpose 50 years out the gate, kind of in that tortoise and hare way. Initially, when I got it, I just thought, okay, well, it's going to be a niche film. People are just going to see this as, oh, yeah, that's cute. The Roots drummer made a movie in addition to all the other 42 billion things he does. Like, this is another notch on his bed thing. So I'm not even thinking like this is actually really going to make an impact. But then because we are editing and finishing this film in real time with what was happening in 2020, there's no denying that the same exact circumstances that were happening 50 years ago are happening right now. You know, timing was everything. Like, without what we were experiencing in the last year, I don't think that this film would have hit the same as it's hitting now.
I also think there's a musical connection that runs through. I mean, yes, the visuals and yes, historicals, but I just simply also think that, you know, listening to There's a Riot Going On last year for me reminded me of what I most love about Sly Stone, which is that so much of the rage that was present in some of his music, it seemed to be on some shit like, this rage exists because you're taking me away from my joy, or that you're taking me away from the pleasure I could be accessing. And so now you're getting this.
How could you hear your mama cry? I'm afraid how strong the ride.
To hone in specifically on what makes the music of that era resonate today, I think people hovering over the musical landscape might just be like, well, Black people making songs about struggle. But I also think zoomed in, and more importantly, it's Black people making songs about pleasure and frustration about being extracted from that potential for pleasure.
What we're slowly discovering is that Black joy is an important component that also has to be balanced in our storytelling, and also spirituality, which is way different than religion.
Yeah.
Like, my first draft was like 3 hours and 25 minutes. I had to cut that baby down like 90 minutes, and I was fighting hard to keep the Sonny Chirac footage in because I wanted people to know that that wasn't a guitar solo.
Right.
More than that was not even exercising of demons, but that was therapeutic. And a lot of people don't understand free jazz or primal screaming or knows why James Brown screams like, you know, like, it's funny to people like, oh, damn, yeah, he's really into music, that sort of thing. But no, that's like, for artists and creatives, that's the thin line between suicide or doing something even more destructive. Like, having that outlet frees them. And so that's why I really wanted to show all aspects of what they were watching. Like, this isn't just performing. This is their therapy. This is their form of release.
I wanted to ask maybe a broad question about the responsibilities around unearthing and archiving. I mean, Amazing Grace, I've seen it maybe 10 times now. I've watched it 3 times since the pandemic, because when I watched, I was raised Muslim. I don't have like a connection to the church, but what I see when I'm immersed in Amazing Grace is not religious. It's something higher. And the only conflict I have emotionally with Amazing Grace is that knowing Aretha didn't really want it made, right? Or at least was not as enthusiastic about wanting it made. And of course, the family wasn't all that. But it leads me to think about, this film felt so thoughtful and careful and responsibly made. And I know that you're likely dealing with a different set of permissions and all that. But how did you kind of go about the curation in a way? And not saying Amazing Grace didn't, but there's nothing really hovering over this film for me that where it feels
like taboo.
Yeah.
You know, we had to make some adjustments, but people pretty much saw the greater good and the importance of doing this. And yeah, kind of in the beginning, my North Star was Sidney Pollack's Amazing Grace. Now, only because I'm a stickler for information, of course, instantly, I'm stalking Chuck Rainey, I'm stalking Bernard Purdy. And, they're just telling me story after story about like Charlie Watts parking in James Cleveland's parking space. And he's cussing him, like there's so much I wanted to know that I didn't know. I was going to do just 15 songs and nothing else like Amazing Grace, but I don't know. I'm too newsy, man. Just clip after clip, doors started opening. There's the moment where Gene and Stevie are talking about the moon landing, because the moon landing happens right when Stevie Wonder's on stage. And then I started hearing boos in the audience. And, I understood there was casual disdain, like my uncle would say it, and you hear it in Curtis Mayfield lyrics or whatever. But I really didn't know how universal the disdain was for the moon landing in lieu of, still taking care of what needs to be taken care of on Earth. And once we looked under the hood, at the last minute, we found that footage from CBS News. Weird enough, where Red Fox is in that film, they went to a Sly and the Family Stone show at the Apollo that night, talking about, the moon landing and how much they just thought that it was a waste of money and that sort of thing. So I couldn't leave any stone unturned. I really wanted to investigate and truly get to the bottom of it. Well, it's weird you bring up Aretha. That summit meeting between Mavis Staples and Mahalia Jackson was actually supposed to be Aretha Franklin and Mahalia Jackson. Aretha Franklin was an 11th hour dropout, and it was the Staples singers that actually agreed, okay, we'll do a second week of performances. So the Staples actually performed twice at the festival.
Hearing that we could have had Aretha at the festival is in some ways devastating, because I
got one more for you.
Oh no.
So in the production notes, of course, the TV people who are shooting the flick, Hal told you no. I'm looking at the memos that they're not able to shoot the final week. So if there's any adjustments you want to make in the lineup, you better make them now. And so they sort of scrambled and figured out their lineup for the first 5 weeks. And they just figured that, okay, we'll do the Miss Black Harlem beauty pageant on the 6th week, and we'll just add some unnamed local acts just to sing. And we won't record that because the TV camera crew won't be there. By the way, the TV camera crew couldn't be there because they were shooting a pilot to a brand new show called Sesame Street. And I'm looking at the lineup of who the unknown singer was. That was 17-year-old Luther Vandross's first performance in New York City. And at that, like, it's his whole crew, like Fonzie Thornton, like all the greats that have been with Luther Vandross that he still used. It was all of them as teenagers in a band called Listen My Brother. So I'm really, I wish we had that performance, but
I mean, this is all heartbreaking in a good way.
Sorry.
Which is wild, because didn't Listen My Brother they were on Sesame Street. That was their big break, right? They was on Sesame Street all the time.
Yeah, they wound up being on Sesame Street on that pilot. So
incredible. I remember they had a song that was just about like counting to 20.
Counting to 20. Right.
Yeah,
exactly.
Before you get out of here, I want to ask you one thing. I know there was a 50th anniversary thing that happened in 2019, but if you're thinking about mapping this out now, one, do you think a festival like this spanning that long is possible now? Wiping out like the COVID everything, like in a post-pandemic world, that much talent concentrated in one place over that stretch of time, is that possible in the present?
If you're talking about it, are there a handful of artists that move me? It's also generational, and that's the thing that I really wish we could get to. But I was more amazed at the patience and enthusiasm that the audience had to get into Olatunji and, Hugh Masekela and Mongo Santa Maria. Like they're getting down to African artists, they're getting down to salsa artists, they're getting down to, jazz artists, they're getting down to, comedians and whatnot. Like, I think it's almost about the audience. Like, do we have an audience that's wide open for something new and something unproven? I think that's the one difference. Whereas now, the viralness and the popularity of something determines the life of it, as opposed to, hey, let me try something new and untested before.
Right.
And that's the one seed I really want to plant in terms of like getting people open, just to see camera 4 while Ciroc is doing that solo. Nobody had a look on their face. Like the only moment was the shock of an unannounced Sly and the Family Stone coming to that stage. And naturally, like it was the equivalent of like if Black Thought's and his kids are like going to a Migos show, and he's sort of like, well, my kids are into this, but my heart's more connected to Cool G Rap and Big Daddy Kane, but my kids are into it. Like for the first 3 Sly songs, the kids were losing their minds, and the adults were just like, this is weird. Like I've never seen a girl play trumpet before. But towards the end, you saw them just warm up and win them over. That to me is like exemplary of what I wish happens at like the Roots picnic. And, because all the time I'm just thinking like, okay, stage 1, got to be that. And they might be bored. So let's have stage 2 and an alternate. Like I want people to be more open. So.
Yeah. And enthusiasm, a real enthusiasm around curiosity, right? Like I don't know. I just came up not knowing what I would see at shows sometimes.
Right.
My first hip hop show was Black Star in Cincinnati when High Tech and Kweli were working together. And, that was one of those shows where Black Star didn't come out until late at night, and everything else you just didn't know. You just showed up and it was like, whoever gets the mic gets the mic.
Exactly.
And there was something really thrilling about that. And I actually appreciated being transported back to that moment through this documentary.
Thank you. Thank you, brother.
Thank you for the work. Thank you for chopping it up with me. It's a pleasure. I'm always, have always been a big fan, not only of your music, but even more so perhaps our shared love for digging in the multiple crates of cultural production.
Thank you, man. Well, this thing has opened doors. I'm working on Sly right now, and this is going to be a hell of a journey, like telling these stories. And I hope people are out there to receive it and really enjoy it.
Looking forward to it. Questlove, thank you for talking to me.
Thank you, brother.
That was Questlove, whose directorial debut, the documentary Summer of Soul, is out in theaters now. And now for my final thought. So I think an impulse when thinking about something like the Harlem Cultural Festival is replication. How could this happen today? How can we make this happen now? Could this happen now? And for me, I think it is much more interesting to think about the Harlem Cultural Festival within a lineage of Black cultural production, events and gatherings and concerts made for a specific place and a specific people. Speaking with Questlove has made me think a lot about how Black creativity is something that is uncontainable and therefore continues to show up in more dispersed events throughout the country, events that, whether directly or indirectly inspired by the Harlem Cultural Festival, still continue to live in its legacy. I live in Columbus, Ohio, and a few years ago, a Columbus poet and artist and cultural worker named Scott Woods put on an event called Holler, which was 30 days of Black art, which meant that every night for a whole month, you could go somewhere in the city and see a Black person doing some art, be it a concert, a poetry reading, an art exhibit. Every single night, you knew what you'd be seeing, and you left fulfilled and perhaps eager to return for the next night. All the artists were from Columbus, and these were artists I knew. These were artists I'd seen around the city, I'd talked to. These artists were my peers. They were very much like stars on a festival stage all through the process of Holler unfolding. And that was inspiring and exciting to see the city galvanized by this movement And to see the people at the center of it be people I looked up to, people I grew up around, that was really special.
Flames would like to burn. Give me a stage and the mic to burn. Uplift the game with righteous words. I'm here now, and you'll go far.
Things like the Harlem Cultural Festival, things like Holler here in Columbus, make it very clear that Black brilliance is abundant. So abundant that it must be stretched out over multiple days. It cannot be contained in one day, in one place, in one festival that lasts a weekend. It has to last longer than that. It has to be more robust than that. And I don't think we need to replicate the Harlem Cultural Festival itself. The lessons are doing the replicating for us. This has been Object of Sound from Sonos. Thank you to our guest this week, Questlove. You can find our podcast on Apple, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. If you like what you hear, go ahead and rate it and share it with your friends. This is a communal thing, music discovery, so tell us what you like about the show and what you're listening to. Let us know your thoughts in an email at objectofsound@sonos.com. You can follow the show at Object of Sound on Instagram and on Twitter. This show is produced by Work by Work. Scott Newman, Gemma Rose Brown, Babette Thomas, Mayari Sharina Ong, and by me, Hanif Abdurakib. The show is mixed by Sam Baer. Extra gratitude to Joe Dawson and Saida Blount at Sonos. I'm always talking about music online on Instagram and Twitter at Neef Muhammad. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you for being a part of the show.